Hey everyone, welcome back to Build. I'm your host, Brittany Jones-Cooper, and today I'm sitting down with Elaine Welteroth. She was the first Black beauty director at a Condé Nast magazine and went on to become the youngest ever editor-in-chief in Condé Nast history, where she brought out the progressive and political side of Teen Vogue. Now she's entertaining audiences as a judge on Project Runway, where she continues to be a force in the worlds of media and fashion. But in her first book, More Than Enough, Welteroth shares how she navigated love, race, politics, and self-doubt on her climb to the top. Please put your hands together for Elaine Welteroth.
Thank you.
How you doing?
I'm doing really good. I love that you described it as my first book.
Yeah, because I know this isn't your last. I mean, honestly, after reading your book, I have such a better idea of who you are. I've obviously been a fan of yours for a few years, but you're so vulnerable and honest in this book, so I think it's something that your fans and new fans are gonna really appreciate and love. I do love that the last chapter is called, like, a new beginning?
It's just the beginning.
Just the beginning. Just
yes.
the beginning. And because obviously you are 32 and there's so much life to live. So why did you want to write a memoir or just sort of tell your story now?
Well, I call it part memoir, part manifesto. Because, listen, I think when one woman tells the truth, she invites other women to wake up to their own truth. And there is an urgency at a time like this for more women to be sharing their stories. And it's one of the reasons that I spent 10 years of my career as a magazine journalist finding and elevating stories from underrepresented communities. And, now I found myself at this point in my career where I realized I needed to take my own advice and I had to tell my own story as well. And it wasn't easy, but I felt like, if I'm going to be held up like a role model for this next generation of young leaders, then I better be doing the work to make sure that I'm telling more of the story, more of the truth. I mean, we live in this culture where we all scroll each other's, highlight reels. And I think we do a disservice to each other when we don't tell more of the story, because there's so much about this book that is not about just me. This is a universal experience. Anyone who has ever known what it is to be overlooked, undervalued, overwhelmed, othered, this is your story. Anyone who's ever come from a small town and had a big dream and was trying to figure it out, this is your story. And I wish when I was coming up, there was a book like this for me to read that was honest about the hustle behind the highlight reels that you see. And I just felt like I have more to say than I could ever fit in a pithy caption on Instagram. And I want to be a part of opening up the dialogue around some of these harder issues so that we're actually informing and educating and preparing this next generation, and also creating space for women who are my peers and even older to tell more of the truth as well for them. And so I hope that it touches people's hearts, and I hope that they see themselves on these pages.
I think it will touch people, like I said, because of her vulnerability. And I think when we see a strong Black woman who's out there in the world, achieving, you forget that she is a woman, she is a person, she's had struggles, and we like to make her this superhero, but often, in most cases, she's not. And I think that's something that you showed, those ups and downs of your career, and also being so honest about race and growing up biracial and just living in those two worlds and how difficult that can be. Yeah. So take me through the process of writing about your personal experience with race.
Yeah, it's interesting. This book, I really do feel like it's more than a memoir. It's more than about me. In some ways, it's a book about race. Mm-hmm. It's a book about identity. More than coming of age, it's about coming into your power. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes the best way that we can talk about and unpack these bigger, controversial, heavy topics like race, like representation, like microaggressions, is to tell stories. Because oftentimes the only depiction of racism that we hear in the media are these gross extremes, right? And the way that we often experience them as people of color in this country, especially if you are in corporate America, is actually much more subtle and sometimes unconscious. Like, the folks who are perpetuating some of this stuff, they're unconscious to it, and often well-intentioned white people. And I think the beauty of storytelling is that it has the power to change hearts and minds. And unless you see yourself, like, no one wants to be called a racist and no one identifies as a racist, right? But until you can see yourself as part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. And so I've always loved the way storytelling invites people in to see the world through someone else's eyes, and hopefully helps wake people up to some of these larger issues that you might not even think affect you. Because, and that's what privilege is. Privilege is not having to see discrimination that doesn't affect you. But when you break it down, we have these hashtags, representation matters, and everyone can kind of retweet and get behind that, whether they understand the issue fully or not. But then if you tell the story about, one of my first stories in the book and my very first memory in life is captured in this chapter I call White Paper Family. And it is the story of me being a preschooler, and it's literally my first memory in life. And it is the experience of being othered. I'm in my preschool class, and we were all asked to make a collage that represents our family. And so we're sitting there going through the magazines, and I'm realizing no one in these magazines looks like my family. And in that moment, I realized I was different. I never knew I was Black until that moment. And then I didn't want to be different. I wanted to be like everyone else. So I just decided to cut out all white people. And then I came home, and my mom was like, "Home, we don't play that. Houston, we have a problem." And so we redid the assignment together, and my brother got dragged into it, and she pulled out Ebony and Essence magazines, and we redid that collage. I got to keep my white dad. I'm from an interracial family, even though I made him look like a suave businessman, slicked hair, business suit and a briefcase. And in real life, he's a carpenter who came home covered in sawdust. So he was just as unrealistic as any of the other white people on my collage, but my mom let me keep him. And then my mom put this picture on my wall, and it was the first thing I saw every day, the last thing I saw every night, and it was there to remind me of who I really am. And I think we need those reflections of who we are out in the world, because as they say, if you can't see it, you can't be it. And so, flash forward, when I got the opportunity to be a magazine editor, to help decide what goes on those pages, I felt a mission to really reflect all those girls like me who never saw themselves centered. And that was a lot of my work kind of became about that. And so in some ways, I think of myself as like an accidental activist, because all I was doing was just being myself, telling stories that reflected me and the community that I come from. And in a world like this, sometimes that's radical. Sometimes that can be a radical act, just being who you are.
Yeah, I think it takes actually an incredible amount of bravery to talk about your race and identity in the way that you do, because especially in this culture now where Black is so celebrated, you were able to admit that there were moments in your life where you kind of wished you were white. And I think a lot of people of color, me included, who grew up in a white space, sometimes you're just like, it would be easier. And it's hard to admit that and then talk about the journey that you have to go on to be fully in your identity.
Yeah.
It's hard. And so I think it's really brave to talk about it in that context, because a lot of people like to pretend that doesn't exist, but it's really a part of a lot of people's journey.
Yeah, I mean, it's just real. I mean, if you grow up in a hyper-white world that celebrates Eurocentric beauty, and as humans, we don't want to be the outsider. We don't want to feel different. And I think it's just natural. It's human nature to want to belong. And so when you have early experiences that make you feel like you don't belong, then that's where the conforming starts. That's where assimilation starts. And I'm grateful to be a part of this new generation of storytellers, of folks who work and have made their way into the media like you, who have the power to change some of those narratives. And I actually think this next generation will benefit from that. I think that their identity, I feel like they came out the womb with their fists up. We have to undo a lot of the conditioning that I think this next generation's just not even fazed by. And I think that means we've done our jobs. But I think it's just the truth. And I think my job with this book was to tell the truth. The good stuff, the messy stuff, and sometimes the painful stuff.
And I think being truthful about your ambition. Ambition is labeled as a negative thing so often, and in your book, it's really something that has been in you really since the beginning.
Yeah.
Back in high school, when you're running for class president. Don't be lame. Vote for Elaine.
So lame, by the way.
Come on, guys. Don't worry. Mine was make the school super. Vote Brittany Cooper.
Ooh, did that work? How'd that
I
work out for
won.
you? So did I, sis. So did I.
High five.
Former-
Sometimes it takes
former class president
a corny
here.
slogan, right, to
Reporting
get the
live.
attention.
Listen, it worked. But it started way before that. You know, when I was in 4th grade, I talk about this in the book, in a chapter called Brown Girl Boss. I talk about, you know, building my own beauty salon in the backyard of my best friend's house with my best friend, and we went all out. We went door to door asking people to give us their old cardboard so we could build our stations, and we just had so much fun living in this imaginary world where we could be the bosses, where we can run stuff. And we even made fake cigarettes that would sneak around the corner of her house and like smoke and on our lunch breaks because we could. And then, you know, honestly, it was also a way to contribute to this kind of really white community of young girls. She was also a brown girl. She was Mexican. And then, you know, I think about the ways in which the world kind of chips away at that confidence that I had from birth. I mean, I even tell a story. My mom's in the audience, by the way, who would actually love to come up here and probably tell you all these stories. But she told me the story since I was little about being. I was in a beauty pageant when I was a little kid, and my mom came up and she was going to escort me like all the other moms escorting their like 3-year-old kids. And she said right before we got on, I like tapped her knee, and I was like, "Mom," I always had a deep voice, "Mama, I'm going on by myself." And she was like, "Oh, I'm getting fired by my 3-year-old." Oh, she was like, I didn't know whether to be proud or to feel offended, you know. And she let me go on, and I'm thinking, I look back, I'm like, who was that kid? Like, who was the kid that did this and that? And the reality is, we are all born with this unbridled sense of confidence and limitlessness and potential to do anything and be anyone we want to be. And then over time, the world has a way of chipping away at that, especially if you're a woman, especially if you're a woman of color. And we're told over and over again in subtle and sometimes overt ways that we're not enough, that we're not smart enough to do that, that we're not rich enough to do that, that we don't come from the right community, that we're too this, too that, too loud, too quiet. And so over time, we start to atrophy. And there is this stat that actually inspired the name of my book. And it said that young girls' confidence peaks at age 9, which is so crazy. And yet, when I thought about my story and my life, I'm like, and I thought about the women around me, it's not surprising. You know, when I was that brown girl boss running things in the backyard, I think I was like 9. And so I think we need to do the work of helping to remind young girls that they are enough exactly as they are, even when they are a work in progress. And I think we have the power to do that when we tell our stories. And hopefully the goal of telling the harder stuff is so that other people cycle through their bad relationships and their hard parts in their life more quickly than we did. You know?
And it's about encouraging, I think, women to use their community of women.
Yeah.
As you did throughout your entire career. It sounds like you had teachers or your mom or just your friends. Like, you were relying on other women to remind you that you were enough. How important was that for you in your trajectory?
It was everything. Every step of the way. If I think back to all these tipping points and, you know, having my mom, first of all, correct me in that moment, check me real early about that white paper family thing. She's like, yeah, not today. Not in my house. But also, you know, when I was in college, I had a college professor who I call M. Foss. Her name is Michelle Foss Snowden, Dr. Michelle Foss Snowden, if you're watching, hi. But it was the first time that I'd ever seen a professional woman that I could see myself in. And I gravitated to her, and I asked her questions about her life and the world, and I felt like I was in a place of confusion about who I could be and how big I could dream and how far I could take this. And she, in a very pivotal moment in my pre-career, when I finally had the courage to say out loud that I want to be a magazine editor, which, you know, now sounds like, oh, of course you did that. I came from a small town. People were not dreaming of moving to New York City, and I had no roadmap for how to figure out how to get into media or fashion or magazines, right? So it felt lofty and scary and overwhelming. And I remember this day like it was yesterday. My teacher forced me to tell her what is in my heart. What is it that I really want to do? And I kept saying like it's stupid. I didn't believe in myself. And she forced the words out of me. And I eventually told her I want to be the editor-in-chief of a magazine one day. And at the time it was Essence. And she was like, obviously. She was like, you would be an incredible editor. And she reminded me of all these things that I had told her. Like, I'd had this magazine, I'd had these photo albums since I was a little kid that I would obsess over. I would stay up all night and try to find the right font and the right pictures and like trying to tell the perfect story. Like, and I'm still obsessive like that, obsessive. But it made me a great editor. I'm always looking for the story. I'm always drawing out the stories in from people around me. She's like, you'd be an incredible editor. Go for it. Go for it. Go for it. And I would not have if I had someone on the other end of that message who was like, I don't really see that for you, or who didn't encourage my confidence. And it changed my life. It made all the difference. And you know, even my first boss, a Black woman named Harriet Cole, who opened the door for me in media. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for her. Every boss I've ever had, from Cindy Levy to Amy Astley to Anna Wintour, I've had incredible female bosses that have given me an example of the kind of boss I want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Your time at Teen Vogue, I think, is where a lot of us sort of got introduced to who Elaine is, and it was such a big moment being the youngest editor-in-chief in history. But you give amazing context to that experience in this book, and you show what that experience was truly like, and sort of the obstacles at the time that you had to overcome. I think at one point you said this should have been a really empowering moment, and I felt sort of powerless. So can you kind of take me through, when you look back at that time, just what you learned from going through those trials at a time where it was very high, but you were having to battle some stuff behind the scenes?
Well, listen, the reality is, and I'm sure a lot of us in the room can relate, sometimes our highest highs happen at the same time as our lowest lows. And we have to manage that duality. And that was one of the highest highs of my career, the highest high to date. And it also came with some challenges behind the scenes, which I talk about candidly in my book, and I'm no spoilers, but I'll let you guys read that stuff. But and it's, you know, I would be hard pressed to find any woman, particularly any woman of color, who has never experienced challenges in negotiations or complicated relationships, and so, but we just don't ever tell that part of our success stories. There's a stigma. And I want to break down that stigma, and that's why I kind of talk about some of that stuff. But it was still an incredible time to have an opportunity like that, and I'm forever grateful. And I'm really proud of the way, you know, my team and I came together and focused on the work, and we were able to really transform what was once a fashion and beauty title for teens to a magazine brand that really reflected the youth of today, who are more socially conscious and politically engaged than they have been since the 60s, but they just didn't have that representation. And so we saw Teen Vogue as a platform to elevate those voices. And I remember thinking about, you know, our covers differently and just being like, you know, the magazine industry, by the way, part of the challenges, slight spoiler alert, but like it's obvious, I entered the industry at a time when the magazine business was challenged just like any other. I entered during the recession, guys. So salaries weren't getting bigger, you know, magazines were closing. It was a challenging time for the industry. But what's so beautiful about that, the opportunity we all have right now, is it's a time to reinvent. It's a time to think about how to put new ideas into the world in new ways. And that's what we did. I started to see the cover of Teen Vogue as an opportunity to like multiply, like who do I want who do I want to see more of in the world? This cover is an opportunity to multiply that representation. And so like Amandla Stenberg, Yara Shahidi, you know, Rowan Blanchard, Willow Smith, like these girls are so dynamic, they're forces, and they have so much to say. And so we started to look at whose voice do we want to amplify, not necessarily who has the biggest blockbuster out right now, who has a project to push. It became not about that. And I'm really proud of the way that what the work that we did at Teen Vogue changed the conversation around young people.
Oh, completely. I have to say, during that section of your book, I was pissed. I was pissed. I was mad. I actually had to put the book down for a second. I was like, I can't believe they put her through that. Like, that's bullshit.
Had to go breathe it off a
Yeah, I
little
was
bit.
like, all right, I know how it ends, so let me keep reading.
Yeah.
And to see you guys thrive, even though maybe some points were frustrating, just made, I think, the success even more impressive and
Thank you.
such a joy to watch.
Thank you.
But after that, transitioning out of that, you realized how important self-care was for your life. So can you talk a little bit about that and just sort of what it means, like when you have those moments where you sort of have to rebuild and rethink and refocus, and how important it is for you to take care of yourself in those moments?
Totally. I mean, burnout is a part of everyone's success story, and we don't talk about those times and how we managed our way through. I want to also add, though, you know, during that time, it was a very triumphant time as well, and I'll tell you why. That moment actually reminded me that the work I was doing inside of those walls was for all the people outside of those walls. Because when that announcement hit that I had become editor-in-chief, the youngest editor-in-chief in Condé Nast history, the second Black person to ever hold that title, which, by the way, I didn't know that until I saw it in the headlines like everyone else. I was like, wow. But also, dang, we have work to do. We have to make progress. I have a responsibility here. But the resounding celebration that was reflected back to me from us, from Black Twitter. I mean, though in that moment, those voices lifted me up, and they reminded me of my why, who I'm there for, and I think that's important. I think that the age of social media has completely, radically changed the flow of information, and I think it's important that we are in a part of a culture that really celebrates each other during hard times, including burnout, which I talk about in the book. And I say in my book, I say there's hustle and there is flow, and you cannot sustain one without the other.
Before we go to audience questions, I just want to ask really quick about Project Runway. How much fun has that experience been for you, and what is sort of your mission going into this role? What did you want to get out of it or help spread?
Yeah, really, my mission was the same as it was at Teen Vogue. It feels almost like a natural progression of the work that I was doing there. You know, Project Runway was one way for so long, and it worked really well. And I think now we're in this phase of reinventing, reimagining how we can make this show more connected to what's happening in the rest of the world. And also what's happening in fashion, the conversations that are happening in fashion around diversity and inclusion. And I'm really proud that it is the most inclusive season of Project Runway ever. And I'm just honored to be on a show where I get to spend time with people that I've admired in the industry for so long. We hang out. It doesn't really feel like work until you know, it's so funny. The thing that we all learned about ourselves is that we aren't as tough cookies as we thought. Like, we actually are not okay after all those eliminations. We're like texting each other, and we cried more than the designers did during this season. But it's been such an honor to be a part of this new evolution of the show.
It's so fun to watch.
Thank
I think anybody who was like a fan of the previous, you know, this new one has been such a joy. It's just so much fun. And like you said, modernized, and there's more points of connection, I think, for today's audience.
Well, the finale is this Thursday. We're down to the bottom four, or top four. Do you have a favorite?
I can't pick favorites.
You can't pick
No.
favorites? Well, you could never be a judge
No,
on the show. We have to battle it out
I
back
feel like
there.
everybody's great, everybody's awesome. I just appreciate the work and heart that you put into your creation.
You'd be the Paula, clearly.
All day. Well, we do have a couple questions from the audience.
Okay.
Who do we have first? Right here.
Hi, my name is Madison. I just want to say thank you so much for being such an incredible inspiration and using your platform for, you know, creating positive change. So my question is, how do you set a boundary between being professional and, you know, being authentic on social media?
It's a really good question, because these days you often will not get hired without being vetted online, and everything that you put up is a reflection of how you want to be seen by the world and also your employers. I think, though, now more than ever, hiring managers, especially if you're looking to work in media, are looking for someone who has a voice, who has a perspective that can be additive. And so I think, you know, when I was growing up, I feel like we were taught to censor ourselves completely. And I think now that doesn't serve you. I think you really should find a way to be yourself and to elevate what matters to you, because it gives you a point of difference that will make you stand out when you're looking for work or when you're looking to excel in your career. I think what you can do best is just to be yourself.
Thank you.
No party pictures and I mean alcohol and stuff like that. Maybe say that for the stories, for the close
leave them
friends.
out the stories. Too.
No, but close friends you can filter. I'll show you later.
Next.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. Are you gonna tell them how we know each other?
That's a story. So I interviewed with Elaine when she was at Teen Vogue to be her assistant, like right before she left. So
Yes.
that's why
Yes.
we are where we are. So you mentioned how important certain role models were as far as like the trajectory of your career, and how you couldn't imagine how your life would be if they weren't there to encourage you. So what is your advice for people who necessarily don't have those role models in their vicinity, especially if they're the only person of color or the only woman in spaces that they want to build in?
Yeah.
What's your advice for those types of individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I've been there, but I was there when there was no social media. So I had to snail mail, I had to cold call. You all have such an advantage because you can just slide into the DMs of your role models, you know, and whether you hear back from them or not, there is this like sort of digital mentoring that can happen just by watching someone else's walk through the world. And I think of all of us as cultural agenda setters. Like the way we use social media has the power to set the narrative, set a new narrative, and to set the priorities. And so I think when being a young person, being able to see people like Badass Bows, you know, being able to see other role models of women of color in powerful positions and how they're doing it is actually a form of mentorship. They may not be with you every day. They may not be on the other end of your calls when you're going through something. But I do think it's helpful to know that there are other people like you out there who are making it happen, who are successful, and are doing so without compromising their integrity, and they're actually successful because of their authenticity. So I think just that is helpful. But I would also say to you that two things. One, don't underestimate the network that's right around you, the peers around you, because mentorship isn't always top down. A lot of the best mentorship in my life has been peer to peer. So don't discount your sisters that are around you. And then the other thing is seek out jobs or opportunities to work with people that you admire, because the best mentors requires time and investment, and it's very hard to get someone who's running their own race to stop and spend time with you unless you're working for them. So make yourself invaluable to the women that you want to work with and for, because you'll have more opportunities for them to pour back into you as well.
And in the book, she really details how sort of persistent you maybe have to be to get
I was a stalker.
the attention of people you admire. The story of how you connected with Harriet Cole is really, really great. And also, when you were applying for an internship at Essence, it was so extra.
I went all out.
But, you know, you got attention, and that's what it takes, right?
Yes.
So.
I made a whole video pitching myself for the job, which was not a part of the application process. And then I also, and it's so funny, I found it when I was moving recently, and there's NDR replaying in the background. I'm in my parents' study, the blinds are broken. There's an old clunky printer. I'm I am so glad that YouTube was not a thing when I did this, because it is so embarrassing. But it just shows I was willing to do anything to get the job. I made my own magazine, mock-up magazine. I did whatever I had to take. And I think that is what it takes to break into a competitive industry. It's not easy.
I agree. Who has the next one?
Hi, that was a dramatic entrance.
Wow.
I was thinking about the anecdote you told earlier about the picture that your mom encouraged you to put up on the wall, and how you were saying every day that reminded you of who you are. And I was wondering if you could speak more on the power of those small everyday reminders.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for your question. And yes, you're a stand front and center, queen. I think that we all need those reminders of who we are, and it's okay to be different. I'm trying to think of other examples of how that's affected me over time. I will say the only reason I even believed that I could be a magazine editor was because I saw someone like Harriet Cole. And it was specifically her. It was the way she did it. It wasn't just that she was a magazine editor and that she was a Black woman. This was a woman who had figured out how to use her time, building a foundation of her career in magazines, and use that as a jumping off point to carve out her own lane in media and to figure out how to make her authentic voice her multi-platform. So a lot of times we think that we pursue one career path, but the reality, and that's all that we really can focus on doing, but the thing to remind ourselves is that your life is a series of dreams realized. And Harriet was someone who had manifested multiple dreams in her career, and this is before everyone was a multi-hyphenate. But seeing that you could do that, she was like a mini Oprah. She was like a mini media mogul, and it just inspired me so much because all these other jobs that I'd been hearing about felt so confining. I couldn't see myself I was just like, I don't want to check a box just to check a box. I want to do something that feels like me. And I was so lucky to find someone like that I could see myself in, because I don't know if I would have pursued this path otherwise. I mean, I was literally applying for jobs to work in the financial business. I mean, I can't even count, okay? But I was like to work in I think it was life insurance, I don't even have life insurance now. I mean, I was a very lost child at the end of college. And so I'm just so grateful that I had someone like that. But again, you guys have social media. You have access to so many different creative, inspiring women bosses today that we didn't have. Not to sound like I'm old. I'm only 32.
We're the same age.
Yeah.
I think you and I also share a love of Oprah. You just mentioned Oprah.
I mean,
have you had an
anti-Oprah.
opportunity to confess your love to her yet, or have that moment with her where you're just what you meant to me?
A little bit. I hope to have another moment where I could go even more in. Although it's hard because I feel like everyone does that with her. I did meet her. I did the sort of press junket for A Wrinkle in Time for Ava DuVernay. I was her host, and I interviewed all the people who came on, and all I could see when I got the list was Oprah. I was like, I'm interviewing Oprah? Are you kidding me? And when that moment happened where she walked up and she said my name, I almost passed out. And it was live, by the way. It's like a live telecast. And I looked at the camera and I go, Oprah just said my name. And then she comes on, and I automatically drop into a bow down. I just start bowing, and then all of a sudden she starts bowing to me. And then there's a boomerang of that moment, which best boomerang of all time. And we had a brief few moments to spend together, but even in that moment, I felt her power, the power of her presence, and she gripped my arms as only Auntie Oprah does. If you've watched her show, you know what I'm talking about. It's like this death grip of love. And she just drew me in, and she was like, you have to remember that your only obligation in life is to listen to the whisper. You know, because you know what to do. You know the answers. You already have them. You just have to listen to the whisper. And she was like, Elaine, like Auntie Oprah to Elaine. It felt very personal, and it was happening on this live telecast. I'm like, we're supposed to be talking about Wrinkle in Time. I'm getting life advice from my guru. But that's the power of being in her presence. She's incredible. And then recently, I actually saw her at an award show that she was getting an award. She was getting an award in LA. And I'm late, as always, to the red carpet because I could care less about taking a red carpet picture. I actually hate taking red carpet pictures. So I show up, and I look to my left, and none other than Oprah Winfrey is standing next to me on this red carpet. And I was like, see, I knew I was right on time. But then I got too shy to run up to her and say anything. But we were in the same, vicinity, and we saw each other. We had the black girl nod. Yeah.
Also, you just embodied Oprah because when you were telling me what she was telling you,
you felt it.
And I feel better for it.
We have invoked the spirit of Oprah.
She's in this room with all of us always.
You get a car. You get a car. Just kidding.
No,
just kidding. You get a book, maybe.
You can get an MTA ticket, though. It's cool. Well, Elaine, it's been so great chatting with you. I have to say, your career path is so impressive, and people are going to get so much from that. But I also think the conversations you have about feeling tokenized and your self-worth in relationships and your relationship with colorism, I mean, all of these topics are so important. And it was just such a joy for me to get to sit and read through it and relate to something so much. So congratulations on the book.
That means everything to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And guys, More Than Enough, Claiming Space for Who You Are, no matter what they say, is available today wherever books are sold.
Woo!
Put your hands together for Elaine Welteroth.
Thank you so much.